What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Figured this would be a topic some New York Giants fans may want to talk about. Was going to do a video today regarding the general manager search for the New York Giants, being that inevitably Dave Gettleman is going to be replaced. Did a lot of research into that. I'll just push it back a day. Today we'll talk about the huge news of the day from around the NFL, the big rumor of the day, that being Russell Wilson. Now, we know Russell Wilson this year is struggling, for him at least. Still has 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in 9 games, which is nothing to sneeze at, and has had an injury. He is 33 years old. I've talked about him in the past in terms of whether or not the New York Giants should at least consider making a move to go out there and get Russell Wilson. The Giants and Wilson have been linked in the past a couple of years ago when I didn't think it was super realistic, being that the Seattle Seahawks were still competing as a football team year in and year out. He then signed an extension with the Seattle Seahawks. This year, however, with him being injured, the fact that he's going to be 34 next year, it could make a lot of sense for the Seattle Seahawks to look to move on from Russell Wilson and try to start a rebuild there and potentially draft their next future quarterback. That remains to be seen. Wilson, of course, has had a ton of success there, but could they elect to make a move similar to what, say, the Detroit Lions did with Matthew Stafford, try to trade him to a team that would look to compete? Whether or not that would make sense with the New York Giants, that you could certainly debate. And I don't even think we'd have the answer into whether or not the New York Giants would entertain this until we start to see what their offseason plan would be, who their GM is going to be, and how much the price would be to bring in Russell Wilson. But let's get into all the specifics today about the news about Russell Wilson. Whenever there's a news about one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL that would potentially want to come to your football team, you certainly have to talk about it. This is coming out from Jordan Schultz, like I said, formerly worked for Yahoo Sports. Sources: Russell Wilson would strongly consider waiving his no-trade clause for the Giants, Broncos, and Saints. And that news isn't being leaked for no reason. Wilson, I would guess, probably wants out in Seattle. And what's the main reason why he would want out? I would think it would be his horrible offensive line. All you have to do is look at the way that the Seattle Seahawks have played when you watch any Seattle Seahawks game. I've seen them on primetime a couple of times this year, and it is horrible. Which makes you wonder, why in the world would he consider the New York Giants? I'm not 100% sure about the situation with the Broncos. I know that the New Orleans Saints have a great offensive line. Broncos definitely have some good young emerging weapons and a very strong defense. And I would think if he went to the Broncos or the Saints, both of those teams would immediately become Super Bowl contenders. You think about Russell Wilson with Sean Payton and the Saints, those weapons, that offensive line, that could be dynamic in a dome, and it could certainly prolong his career, similar to what the Saints were able to do with Drew Brees over the last 3 or 4 years of his career, right? You look at what Jameis Winston's been able to do there. There's been a resurgence there. Nobody would debate in terms of who's the better quarterback, Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston. So from a football standpoint, both of those destinations clearly make a lot more sense for Russell Wilson. We'll get into what the New York Giants, though, in terms of what they'd be able to offer and what would draw Russell Wilson to the New York Giants. After all, the New York Giants offensive line is just as pathetic as Seattle. Granted, we have 2 first-round picks this year and an early second. But you'd probably have to trade at least one of those picks to even acquire Russell Wilson. And what would draw Russell Wilson here? Well, to me, the only clear answer is his wife. And his wife, Ciara, in the past is, I think there's been rumors that have come out, would want to live in New York. It's a big city. It would be good for his image, his brand. He's thinking long-term for himself as an individual, but as a New York Giants fan, is it the best fit? There is no denying Russell Wilson would be a huge upgrade at the quarterback position. That's not a knock on Daniel Jones. You're talking about one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, a guy with a Super Bowl title under his belt, and a guy that in the past has demonstrated he's been able to make things work with not a lot of help around him. Yes, Seattle's had weapons, but that offensive line has been pathetic, which is why Wilson wanted to get out of there a couple of years ago. So I certainly understand the attraction by New York Giants fans. This coming out from Ted Wynn. In my opinion, the best thing for both parties is a divorce regarding Russell Wilson. Seattle needs a reset and a first-round pick or 2, and Wilson needs a fresh start. Listen, if you only got to give up 1 first-round pick for Russell Wilson, if you're the New York Giants, you have to at least pick up the phone. I'll say that. You have to at least entertain it for 1 first-round pick. In terms of what the teams would have to offer from this year's draft class, the New York Giants right now are projected to have the 6th and 7th pick overall. The Broncos, if the season were to end today, would have the 14th, and the Saints would have the 11th. So obviously, just looking at that, at least from this year's draft, as of now, and you don't expect the New York Giants or the Chicago Bears to win a lot more games going forward. I don't know what the Saints' remaining schedule and the Broncos' remaining schedule is, but it would lead you to believe that the best package that could be offered between these three teams would, in fact, be the New York Giants. Another thing that I was thinking about it, if we do bring back Joe Judge, which I don't know if we will or we won't, you would have to think that Joe Judge would have a lot of say in terms of the personnel decision, similar to the way that he's had over the last 2 years. And if you're keeping Judge, more than likely you're kind of bringing in a GM to work with Judge. Well, if you're Joe Judge and you know more than likely next year you're coaching for your job, if the Giants only win 5 games this year and there's a ton of injuries going into next year, Judge cannot have a 5 or 6 win season. Would it give a more of an incentive for Joe Judge to try to be aggressive and bring in a quarterback like this? Of course, there's a lot of things that would have to be figured out if the Giants were to bring in Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's contract, for one. The guy makes a ton of money. How would you offset that? You'd have to include players in the trade, maybe like a guy like James Bradbury, to try to combat the cost. Those are things that you figure out if you want to bring in a quarterback like Russell Wilson, but it wouldn't be simple. Let's put it that way. We know that right now I think the New York Giants only have about $3.5 million in cap space. You'd be bringing in a guy like Russell Wilson who would eat up a lot of that. I wanted to look at some past trades in terms of what teams got for players. Now, what I'll say is this. In this instance, it wasn't like Stafford was forcing himself off the Detroit Lions. This was a team that was looking to pluck Matthew Stafford onto their roster. The Rams, more or less, were the team that really didn't have much leverage in this situation. But this was the trade that was for Matt Stafford going from the Lions to the Rams. Matt Stafford trade. The Rams send 2 first-round picks, a third-round pick, and Jared Goff to the Lions for a quarterback. So to get Matt Stafford, who is at least comparable, I would put Wilson above him, but he's in the same boat, I would suppose. They had to give up 2 first-round picks. Now, maybe the fact that they had to get rid of Goff to make that trade work, maybe that's why they got the second first-round pick. We all know that Jared Goff is not the most attractive quarterback, and maybe the Lions said, we'll only do it if you give up a first. And granted, it was 2 projected late first-round picks, being that the Rams were projected to be a very good team this year. Maybe 1 early first-round pick kind of offsets that. So you have to ask yourself, as a New York Giant fan, would you be willing to give up the 6th or the 7th overall pick as of now, if the season were to end, to bring in a guy like Russell Wilson? Maybe that would be the cause for Russell Wilson. Listen, I've seen teams do this in the past. The New York Jets did it with Brett Favre. Of course, that was only a 1-year experiment. Brett Favre improved the Jets from a 4-win team to a 9-win team in 1 year. Didn't get them over the hump. Of course, if the New York Giants were to bring in Wilson, who in the past has talked about how he wants to play as long as Tom Brady has, which would mean he's still got like 10 years if he was able to accomplish that, it wouldn't be a 1-year experiment. You'd be hoping that you could build this team over the next 2 or 3 years, and bringing in a guy like Wilson could give you an opportunity to compete to win a championship 2 or 3 years down the line. And if you're Joe Judge, you look at it like it could help save your job, being that Wilson in the past has been able to show that he's able to compete with less than super rosters with the Seattle Seahawks. In terms of what Wilson's been able to do, from 2017 to 2020, just looking at the most recent years when he didn't have a whole lot of help with the Seattle Seahawks, in a tough division in the NFC West, he went 9-7, 10-6, 11-5, 12-4. Of course, this year he's struggling at 3-6. He was hurt this year. I think he missed 2 games. Geno Smith stepped in there. But in terms of his production, it's still at least somewhat similar. No. Is he on pace for 40 touchdowns like he had last year? Absolutely not. But he's still having a pretty productive year, at least statistically, with a 67% completion percentage, 14 touchdowns and 4 interceptions in just 9 games. The year before, he had 40 touchdowns. Now, I will say, after that Giant game where we kind of figured him out, you started to see that Seattle Seahawks offense tail off, but I believe that was a career high for him from within a season. The 3 years prior to that, he had 31 touchdowns, 5 picks, 35 touchdowns, 7 picks, and 34 touchdowns and 11 picks. Listen, if Russell Wilson wants to come to the New York Giants, you at least have to listen to the offer. Would it be the wisest decision long-term to bring in a 33, 34-year-old quarterback for a team that, in my opinion, is at least 2 years away from having a team that could be equipped, and that's if you even draft properly, to be able to compete for a Super Bowl? It's a gamble. Let's put it that way. It's certainly probably an even bigger gamble than that of Kenny Golladay based off the fact the money that Russell Wilson makes, and you'd be giving up draft capital. You'd throw away that opportunity to get a guy like an Aiden Hutchinson or like a top-tier offensive lineman to bring in Russell Wilson. But there's no denying it. The most important position in football is Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson is one of the select few quarterbacks that could put a team on his back, or at least he's demonstrated that in the past. Was it enough to get to a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl? Nope. And of course, if you were to do this, you'd have to move on from Daniel Jones as well. Something the New York Giants would certainly have to consider. But it's interesting, nevertheless. Do I think it'll happen? No. But I've seen crazier things happen. We'll have to wait and see how this offseason plays out. If I had to guess, Russell Wilson will force his way up the Seattle Seahawks. It does not seem like it is in the best interest of Seattle, nor Russell Wilson, to continue that marriage. Where would I want to end up, at least from a football standpoint, if I were him? I would be drooling over the opportunity to play with Sean Payton and the New Orleans Saints with that offense, in that dome, with that strong offensive line. From a football standpoint, I don't think it's close. I think it's them, then I think it's Denver, then I think it's the New York Giants. But if what is said is correct, he'd at least have interest in the New York Giants, and there'd only be 3 teams that he'd be very intrigued to go to. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.